For our penultimate session, we have a great set of speakers for you, led by Mr. Taleb Alrefai, who is a Kuwaiti author, writer, public intellectual, great guy, and he will be interviewing newly published author May Al-Nakib, as well as Lana, Shamma from Bloomsbury, Qatar.
Well, hi everybody. I will start a little bit in Arabic just to say that احنا سعداء بالكويت بأن يحتضن دار الآثار الإسلامية فعاليات المنتدى العالمي للفنون. وفي العربي يقال إن الإنسان عبد لما اعتاد عليه، وبالتالي أنا أعتقد الآن أصبحنا جميعاً عبيداً للتكنولوجيا. الكل عبد للكمبيوتر، ثم للتليفون الذكي، ثم إلى وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي، وبالتالي اخترقت التكنولوجيا جلودنا واستقرت إلى جانب خفق القلب لتشكل جزء من مشاعرنا، ومؤكد أن جزء من هذا ينتقل إلى الكتابة وينتقل إلى النشر. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to be here. I'm honored to be here also. And we are in Kuwait welcomed the Global Art Forum. Tonight we are talking about the technology and how the technology has come very near to us. Also in English they say old habits die hard. So today everyone, each of us is going to anywhere with his phone, with his computer. No way we can be afar from our things. So by your name, by Dar al-Athar, the global forum, I welcome May Al-Nakib, the writer, Kuwaiti writer, and Lana Shamma, the publisher, and American Arabic ladies, somehow. Well, we start with Lana. She is currently heads the Reading and Writing Development Program at Bloomsbury Qatar Foundation Publishing. She has received her Master in Public Diplomacy at University of Southern California. Lana will talk about 10 minutes, then back again to May for another 10 minutes. Then we will open a discussion with the audience or between us. Please welcome Lana.
So, we're prompted by the concept of the global village in speaking today. Okay. So, according to Marshall McLuhan, the enhanced electric speed in bringing all social and political functions together in a sudden implosion has heightened human awareness of responsibility to an intense degree. Of course, we're talking about the internet. So this increased speed of communication and the ability of people to read about, spread news from as global forces has caused us to become more involved with one another, form social groups and countries around the world to become more aware of responsibilities. So what can we draw from this? We can conclude that this results in a change in the community. Before the internet, the community was limited to the locale, namely because of the rich oral history in this region. And now we formed a conglomerate, unified global community. So this painting is from the Shah Abbas era, and it represents a number of forms of entertainment. You can see we have acrobats, storytellers, who we call the hakawatis, musicians, and singers. So especially before the age of radio, the hakawatis played a central role in society in defining modes of expression, entertainment, and reflecting the importance of oral history. So this is an excerpt from a novel by Lebanese-American author Rabia Alamuddin. I really like the way it speaks about the role of the Hakawati. I don't have to read it, just look at it. So I would like to argue that in combination with publishing, the internet has contributed to a resurgence in the livelihoods of our modern-day Hakawatis. So they're no longer relegated to the majlises, or diwaniyas, as you call them in Kuwait, or the cafes of yesterday. Writers are now using the internet to redefine communities of readers around them that are not subject to geographic isolation anymore. These readers make up the conglomerate community we just spoke of. So there are complications sometimes, but we have to remember that publishing is a global industry. In thinking about the way that Bloomsbury Qatar Foundation Publishing deals with technology on a day-to-day basis, I could narrow it down to these 4 ways. We're unique in that we're owned by Qatar Foundation, but managed by Bloomsbury in the UK. So we sort of straddle both East and West in our business practices and what we publish. So all of our submissions are actually done online. Traditionally, a lot of submissions are done when people meet face-to-face, paper manuscripts are delivered, and we also do our layout all over. So layout may be done in Beirut, copywriters in Syria, translators in Palestine, printing in China, publicity out of New York and London. All of this is facilitated by technology. Naturally, we think about ebooks, but I'll talk about that on the next slide. Social media. A lot of our authors, especially in the Gulf, rely on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to touch base with their readers and their fans. So this lets our modern-day Hakawatis continue to weave those yarns that we speak about, whether it's narratives about their personal lives or narratives about the stories that they've just published. And all of these are contributing to bolstering the role of the writer in the Gulf and the Arab world today. And finally, literary prizes. With the Arab Booker Prize, we have authors who generally had local followings in their countries. For example, Saud al-San'usi, when he won the Arabic Booker Prize, rose out of Kuwait and became a global figure. And now we're translating him to English so people can understand local Kuwaiti stories. In fact, he claims that he doesn't understand why anyone would want to read about a local Kuwaiti story. So this is also facilitated by technology. These figures are actually how much literature exists in translation today. So these are 4.5% from foreign languages into English in the UK, and 3% from other languages into English. That's it. Arabic is the 4th most translated language in the world. We have German, Spanish, and French, not particularly in that order. So this is relevant because a lot of Bloomsbury Qatar's titles are works in translation. So again, we're using technology to facilitate the flattening of borders between people so that stories can travel from place to place. And nowadays, more and more people from the Middle East are not turning to Arabic to express themselves. For example, Qatari-American author Sophia Al-Maria wrote her novel in English, and we're translating it to Arabic, and it comes out this summer. A lot of people wouldn't have ever been able to read her story if it wasn't translated. So this fluidity in language contributes more and more to technology allowing for the flow of stories back and forth by our modern-day Hakawatis. So the Arabic ebook dilemma. For a long time, many people were afraid of using their credit cards online to buy ebooks if they had credit cards. But there's a website called kutubi.com which launched last year, and if you live in Egypt, they've partnered with Vodafone and they've allowed people to use phone credit to purchase books. So that's been one way of alleviating that. Of course, this will have to happen in more than one country. And it's only been around since 2014. We don't have our books on there yet because what's happening is that the rights have not been negotiated internationally. So Bloomsbury is subject to global agreements, and the difficulty is that with Kutubi coming around, no one ever thought about ebook rights with Arab authors. So you have to go back to Arab authors, you have to start normalizing those, and we would be the only Western Arab publishing house to be on kutubi.com. So lawyers have to be present at all of these conversations. So there is a bit of a cultural difference there as well. And of course, the issue of piracy. Oddly enough, Goodreads is like the online community for readers. That's where you can find most of your Arabic language pirated books. So normally that's a place for people to congregate around books. Now it's become a hub for people to get together and find the books that they can't find, whether it's because of bad distribution in the Middle East or because of censorship. Does anyone recognize this person? Okay. So this is Hassan Blasem. He won the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize last year, which goes to the best work of contemporary fiction translated into English and published in the UK. Digital technology has actually been a hindrance to getting Hassan published. After his first book, Madmen of Freedom Square, he was published in Arabic, in a very heavily censored state. And in 2012, in Jordan, his book was actually banned, and he never even received a hard copy of his book. This was such a bad experience that he vowed never to seek hard copies of his books in Arabic. So what he does now is he puts all of his Arabic texts online to circumvent censorship, because this was so traumatic for him. The irony of this: he is the first Arab, the first collection of short stories who has won this prize and never been published in the original language. He went straight from electronic to hard copy in English and was never published in Arabic. This is really sad, considering The Guardian called him the best writer of Arabic fiction alive. So we ask, is paper forever? In the Gulf, it may not be forever. A lot of us are jumping from intangible histories, oral histories, straight to digital formats. There's about 115% mobile penetration in the GCC, which could play a huge part in engaging readers on electronic formats. But I think that we need to expand the definition of what Gulf writing is. Perhaps we need to reflect Gulf writing by the heterogeneous Gulf populations that exist in the cities here. Traditionally, it's Gulf nationals. When we think of a Qatari writer, it's someone who's a Qatari national, grew up in Qatar. But perhaps we need to include long-term residents or people who have immigrated to Qatar for short-term jobs and have formed relationships with the place. So perhaps that would be the beginning of expanding Gulf publishing and using technology in order to tell the stories of our time. And I decided to ask Amazon when they're thinking of rolling out the Arabic EPUB, because that's not supported right now. So although Kutubi does have ebooks, that format cannot be read on Kindle, and they said not before 2017. So we're seeing a lag here. Technology is developing, but it's leaving our Arabic language writers behind. So this will continue to be a challenge, just like piracy will always be a challenge as that develops while we're still behind. So we'll have to see if paper will be forever. May?
Thank you, Lana. Well, now we go to May. During your speech, you remember me about many things. Later on, we will talk about it. After you, May, please. May Al-Nakib, teaching English and comparative literature at Kuwait University. Her collection of short stories, The Hidden Lights of Objects, on the Edinburgh International Book Festival First Book Award in 2014. And she is now currently writing his first novel, and we are waiting for this novel. Please, May.
Thank you. So, over the course of the last 2 days, we've heard about the indispensable role technology plays in digitizing archives in enabling long-distance collaborations between artists, and Lana has just explained the key role it plays in publishing. While I agree with much of what's been said, I'd like to offer a different perspective here. Writing and reading, and by extension publishing, are threatened by digital technology in the Gulf and beyond. If in the title of our panel, paper is a stand-in for tangibility, permanence, quality, then these are some of the very elements I believe to be at risk. I'll briefly outline 5 disappearances brought on by the global spread of digital technology and how these endanger the forever of writing. So the disappearance of private time. As a writer, what matters to me more than anything else is time. The time to read and ruminate over ideas, the time to allow my mind to wander without any distractions but those of my own making, the time to research and to dream, the time, most significantly, to write. But as Jonathan Crary has argued in his book 24/7, time has been stolen from us by the expanding, non-stop life world of 21st century capitalism. Crary states that we now live in a switched-on universe for which no off switch exists. What does this do to lived reality? It produces disjuncture, fracture, disequilibrium. It effaces the rich textures and indeterminations of human time. It reinforces the values of getting, having, winning, gawking, squandering, and deriding. It produces the appearance of agency. All that liking and favoriting and blogging simulates choice. In fact, agency is precisely what is eliminated in the process. By abdicating choice and responsibility, we give up privacy, and with it, private time. We're told we must have an online presence to be relevant 24/7. I was advised this by my publishers, which is why I opened a Facebook account in February 2014, ahead of the release of my book, and a Twitter account only a few days ago, out of some irrational fear about being left behind. As I give in to what Crary is denouncing, I feel, as a writer, as an intellectual, ashamed, small, dirtied. I recognize that the supposed benefits of social networking and online visibility do not outweigh the pitfalls. Subjecting ourselves to constant surveillance and data harvesting, transforming social relations into monetized and quantifiable forms, shifting individual life to conditions in which privacy is impossible, and that's a quote from Crary. As a writer, what do I lose in all this? The private time of contemplation, secrecy, reflections, dreams, sleep, imagination, curiosity, the stuff of creativity, the stuff great writing is made of. 2, the disappearance of quality. In the supposedly democratizing, equalizing, flattening, homogenizing cyber world, does quality matter? Quality has a quaint ring to it, perhaps a whiff of the elitist about it. Quality harkens back to modernist values, to a pre-Warholian time of nuance and distinction, to critical intellectual values as opposed to the reigning anti-intellectualism of popular Kardashian culture. Let me be clear, no, I do not want to reinstate the high-low distinction. And yes, as a scholar of post-colonial studies and a diehard feminist, I'm thrilled with the hard-won contestation of all things canonical within academe and beyond. However, quality still matters to me, and the anti-intellectualism of most internet engagement is my bête noire, and here's why. We're no longer expected to distinguish between images of war and ads for the cheapest airline or photos of your best friend's dog. It's all part of the non-distinct stream of techno-trash polluting our lives. In the same way, with much less at stake, we don't distinguish between 50 Shades of Grey and Ishiguro's The Buried Giant. Self-published books are considered by many to be exactly the same as those published by established, reputable publishing houses. And Lady Gaga and Beyoncé are feminists, exactly like Simone de Beauvoir and Angela Davis. No distinctions are possible in the digital glare of the present. As Scott Timberg explains, quality has been replaced by sales, criticism by marketing. Art critic Jed Pearl describes this as laissez-faire aesthetics. Under laissez-faire aesthetics, celebrity culture wins, and in its wake go hard journalism, undiscovered or difficult art, literature, and music, and the capacity to assess what might be culturally and socially valuable beyond its potential to generate bundles of cash. For me, value and quality have to do with difficulty in Adorno's sense, and intransigence, contrariness, and critique. That is to say, attributes that push against the seeming inevitability of the present, against the factors expedient to global capitalist culture, against our social atomization and disconnection from ourselves, from members of our community, from our environment. Quality and distinction matter urgently, but digital technology is destroying our capacity to assess the former and to practice the latter. The disappearance of memory. Every second of our digital lives is recorded. Either we record it ourselves, the ceaseless multiplication of selfies and meals and pets and children, or it's recorded for us by the state and corporate surveyors of our online lives. Yet despite this, forgetting is more pronounced than ever, the thick and layered past of less interest to a present-focused generation. Who needs to remember when our technological tools do the work for us? Numbers, statistics, names, dates. Thanks to Google and our phones, we need never retain a single one of these in our heads again. We're free to remember other, ostensibly more important things. But as Nicholas Carr has demonstrated, what's actually happening to our brains as we shift or outsource our memory online is not a clearing for the better, but rather a clearing for nothing. Instead of consolidating more, we lose the capacity to consolidate anything at all. As Carr puts it, we don't constrain our mental powers when we store new long-term memories, we strengthen them. With each expansion of our memory comes an enlargement of our intelligence. The web provides a convenient and compelling supplement for personal memory, but when we start using the web as a substitute for personal memory, bypassing the inner processes of consolidation, we risk emptying our minds of their riches. In short, as far as the faculty of memory goes, use it or lose it. We seem to be losing it. Many of my post-internet students have little grasp or understanding of the 1990 invasion, and not much interest in it either. They have no sense at all of the cosmopolitan history of Kuwait Dr. Sleiman Al-Askari spoke of yesterday. The problem with this lack of engagement with the past is that it makes the present seem inevitable. No memory of the Palestinian community in Kuwait, of Andy Warhol in Kuwait, of their mini-skirted grandmothers visiting the cinemas in Kuwait, of the cutting-edge theater in Kuwait, of the political audacity of Kuwait, and so on. In part, this lack of knowledge is the fault of an inadequate system of education. But I'd venture to suggest that my students' hyper-engagement with the internet, fast, inattentive, overloaded, always moving on to the next thing, contributes substantially to their inability to look back. Looking back doesn't have to involve wallowing nostalgically in some idealized past, but rather putting overlooked elements of the past to use in the present toward an alternative, dare we say better, future. Or, more simply, as a way to know it was there and how it was different. As Carr so eloquently puts it, to remain vital, culture must be renewed in the minds of the members of every generation. Outsource memory and culture withers. This is where we stand. The disappearance of the creative class. Here I refer to Scott Timberg's compelling argument in his book, Culture Crash, The Killing of the Creative Class, which I highly recommend. Timberg argues that the virtual disappearance of the middle class in the United States has resulted in the killing off of the creative class. Ultimately, he says, the only people who will be able to work in culture will be those who don't need to be compensated: celebrities, the very rich, and tenured academics. With the demise of the creative class goes the class of people who have supported the latter: reviewers, critics, journalists, publicists, editors, but also record store clerks and bookstore managers. According to Timberg, the internet has been the great disruptor of both. Internet successes are rare, but the hyper dissemination of such successes via the internet itself creates a false sense of hope amongst an increasingly impoverished and disappearing creative class. If we don't succeed, we're told it's our own fault. We didn't Twitter enough, Facebook enough, Instagram enough. It surely can't be the fault of an economy that has cut the jobs of the very publicists, managers, agents, reviewers, and critics who have, until recently, drawn attention to new and unconsidered talent and have allowed the creative class to focus on their work rather than on self-promotion. It can't be the fault of the internet and the attendant onslaught of music piracy, the plagiarism of ideas that Lana was talking about, the dissemination of newspapers and the decimation, rather, of newspapers and magazines, and the closure of bookstores and music and record stores. Surely not. But here's a sobering fact from Timberg. The young, tech-savvy cellist Zoe Keating has done everything digital cheerleaders advocate. She self-releases her music, has 1.2 million Twitter followers, and in 2013, between 2 million YouTube views and 400,000 Spotify streams, earning from both services a total of about $3,000. If this is true for Zoe Keating, what chance do the rest of us have? And finally, oh, sorry, I forgot, that doesn't matter, but the disappearance of the reader. Some might claim the internet has increased rather than decreased reading. Tweets and text messages proliferate. Abridged information provided by news websites multiplies. Bloggers spew forth one-way auto chatter. Analyses about the clothing choices of celebrities pass for entertainment on these same news websites. And emails fill our virtual mailboxes at an impossible rate. All of the above demand a form of literacy. But it's not the kind of literacy required by books or poems or any long piece of complicated prose. Internet readers are consumers of images and verbal tidbits. Consumers rather than critical readers. Consumers with attention spans shortened by technology itself. Nicholas Carr has thoroughly investigated what the internet is doing to our brains in his frightening book, The Shallows. In short, it isn't good. Technology is flattening human intelligence in a variety of ways, scattering our attention, parching our memories, or turning us into compulsive nibblers of info snacks. It's happening fast at the speed of internet light. Focus, attention, slowness, the attributes indispensable to reading, dissipate. As they disappear, so does the reader. What emerges is uninformed, distracted, inhuman mediocrity, what Mark Bauerlein has labeled the dumbest generation. To read quality books, you need to focus, to direct your critical attention for more than a few seconds, to slow down and absorb more than 140 characters on a page. If we lose this capacity to read, how can we produce an informed middle class? Without an informed middle class, how can we attain a viable democracy? In our region, shouldn't this be the gravest concern? As an educator, I'm worried about what I see in my own students. Literature majors who don't like to read, who tell me they cannot focus for more than 10 minutes at a time. If this is true of those who come to literature with love, what can be said of those who couldn't care less about it? In a culture that already undervalues reading and literature, I fear we're lost. As a writer based in this region, I fear for the future. Do I believe writing and reading will continue? Yes, for the duration of my life, there will continue to be a small group that will pursue the kind of writing and reading I champion. Do I think it will last forever? I'm not optimistic. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, May. Whenever Luna is starting her talk, she remembered me about my father. I'm born in 1958, and at that time, my father was the Hakawati. We used to sit around my father, me and my mother and my sister and my brother. And my father was a very clever Hakawati. He is very good storyteller. He know how to start the story, and when he is stop, and when he then complete that. During this session, with a family, small family, at that time, the Hakawati relationship between my father and us was so warm. There is an eye contact. But nowadays, the Hakawati become a Twitter and a Facebook and an Instagram. And there is absolutely no relation between you and the others. So there is a relationship, but it is not a complete relationship. It's a kind of, you could say, a kind of ghost relationship. It is not there, and you can talk with nobody. And even you can, sometime, I seen a very beautiful lady picture. And I said, well, I'm lucky today I will talk with a lady. Then I discovered this is a man. Unfortunately. Yes, or the opposite. Many men, they put their photo instead of ladies. So this is a part of the, whatever is the global is make with us. Also, Lana remembered me one of my father's story. She told me that there is an old man. He is going in a night holding his grandson hand. And during he is going on, suddenly the thieves is gone to them. So they got everything from this man. So the child starting crying. He said, well, Dad, they take everything. He told him, no, don't worry. There is the most important thing. They couldn't take it. He said, what is this? He told him, my knowledge. I keep everything in my mind. And they didn't take it. Now, the internet, the global internet, they take everything, even our memories. When May talking, we don't have anything. When we are in the school, we keep memorize something about the famous Arabic poets. Nowadays, when I talk to my daughter, she don't remember anything. My first daughter was born, I'm so old man, but I hope my wife didn't hear the sentences. She is here, and she is more beauty than me. But I am look here and there every time, just to prove to her that I'm also have a good relation with others. Anyway, whenever my daughter is born, I was insist to take her to English school because I was so sure that if she don't know English, she cannot contact with others. Anyways, according to Global Forum, we have to open a discussion with the audience. Please, if anybody have anything, please just let me see you. Yes, please.
May, that was absolutely an incredible presentation. I hope this is one of the presentations that gets transcribed. Even though it doesn't end on an optimistic note, I will push you to try and give us an optimistic outlook. It can't all be negative. And what can we do to mitigate the whatever is negative out there? What can we do to instill the love of reading and expand the short attention span and de-Twitterify and de-Facebook this younger generation of Kuwaitis and people in the Gulf and the Arab world?
So I'm generally not a pessimist. I'm generally an optimist. So for me, this felt very strange. So I was
as I was preparing for it, it ended kind of on this down note, and people who know me were like, really, are you going to end? Where's the lift? Because generally I like to end with that lift. And I think that, of course, it's not all bad. You know, it never is. I mean, this is kind of a provocative paper, I think, in some ways. But there are lots of things happening. I think we saw it today. I mean, we saw it the last 2 days, the different kinds of things that technology, people are putting technology to use in incredible ways. And I think that, you know, may end up being the direction, or it's always possible that that's the direction that it goes in. And as I think younger people that are using and are incredibly savvy with this technology start to kind of develop an awareness from the things that are going on around them that are so incredibly interesting, they may push it to move in different directions themselves. And so that's always possible. And I think that, you know, as for, you know, my students, that I'm talked about my literature students, despite the problems that we run into, they're still there, you know, that they're still coming to literature, there's still an interest in literature. And also, I mean, to Lana, you know, the incredible production in literature, I think, in the Gulf region specifically in the last, would you say 10 years? That's been developing is really impressive and encouraging. So both self-publishing, which I again was kind of hard on, but that's also a good, you know, it's a good move that people are turning to that when they don't have access to other means, and I think that is stuff to be encouraged about.
Thank you, May. Any other question, please?
I'd like to respond to Sultan as well. I think that what we've been trying to do in our outreach programs is try and find things that people want to read that are so much more alluring in English, and perhaps working more on graphic novels that speak to people who are growing up in the Gulf. They're sick of reading things that their parents and grandparents read. So we want people to read current stories that resonate with their lives right now. And that's part of the challenge right now, is finding people who are writing these stories, whether it's in Arabic or in English, and getting them into the hands of people who want to read, who are starved for finding materials that speak to them.
Yes, please.
I just want to thank you, all three of you, because this panel is really timely and really important in the GCC, where we have such a high rate of penetration by the internet and users online. And my question is, we live here in a very conservative culture, a culture of absolutes. So surely the fact that somebody can see, as you pointed out, May, the images of their moms and grandmothers in a miniskirt out there on Instagram, and they can see a New Year's celebration where, you know, Bonnie M was performing in Kuwait in the 70s, makes the fact that this narrative that is forced on them, that we were always conservative, that, you know, nobody danced publicly, and, you know, all of this is actually not true. It's part of a socio-political agenda. So I don't necessarily agree with you on that point. And I'm very happy that you talked about this new form of writing. Surely because the technology is changing, the way we write has to change with it. You know, when they had illuminated manuscripts and then they moved to mass publishing, that changed the form. Maybe today people don't want to absorb all that text. Maybe we need some more visual representation.
Right, so to your first point, this is a kind of very new development. So in my other life, I'm an academic and I write about cultural politics, and especially cultural politics in Kuwait. And one of the things as a teacher, you know, as a professor at Kuwait University, my students have no sense of this whatsoever. This is not, you know, they have not detected this on Instagram or Twitter or wherever else. This old history of Kuwait, this cosmopolitan history of Kuwait is baffling. It's just started penetrating in Kuwait in the last year, 2 years. People have been writing about it within academia for much longer, but in terms of the general population, even in culture, culturally speaking, young artists have been going back to this. It's very recent, the last 2 to 3 years, I would say. But of course, academics have been working on it for longer. Kuwait has a very cosmopolitan past that goes back hundreds of years, not just the 30s, 40s, 50s. My students were very unaware of that past, and when you bring in pictures, so I don't bring in Twitter or, you know, Instagrams, but I would bring in the actual magazines from that period. and share it with students and show them images of what Kuwait was like. And yes, they were completely surprised, and you're absolutely right that the reason I said we need to go back, kind of look to the past, is to offer up alternative narratives of nationhood, of, social organization, all of it, of power, etc. And that, I don't think, as from what I've seen, students from 10 years ago versus now, I haven't seen the difference that you seem to be mentioning. As for the second thing about changing, I'm worried, given a lot, Nicholas Carr's book came out a few years ago. There have been many books written since then. The transformation that's happening and the shift from the language or words to the visual, I'm not as optimistic about. Sorry, Sultan. I'm not incredibly optimistic about what that is actually doing. The lack of ability to concentrate, I think that this is problematic because it entails with it a lack of ability to think critically. You need to be able to have that long vision to be able to think. And so yes, I think visuals everywhere. It's not something that we need to kind of increase. It's there. I think that we need a counter to that in some ways. And like I said, I think I said I wasn't optimistic because of course it's a generational thing too. I'm the last. I think my generation is the last generation not to have been born into it. And so what's happening now, we have yet to see. But the reports coming out about how this stuff affects young children, for example, is worrying to me. I'm not completely celebratory about it. Sorry.
But actually, on that point, because I've been writing and looking at this recently as well, there a neuroscientist in London called Kate Mills, who's doing a lot of work on this, basically gave me a paper last week. And there is no conclusive evidence. There's no conclusive evidence. A lot of neuroscientists are working on this because it's become almost a meme in itself, right? Where there's somehow we assume that the kind of atomization of text into more and more granular pieces is having a kind of detrimental effect on our brains, and particularly on the brains of the young, but there is no neurological evidence of that at all yet. Yeah. And so, but it's interesting because, I think it's a narrative that, and I'm glad you mentioned your or our generational positioning, because that's very, very important. Because if we were to go back 40 or 50 years ago, something similar would have been said about television. So when McLuhan was writing Understanding Media, well, even before that, the Gutenberg Galaxy, and then Understanding Media, and then the Medium as a Massage in '67, everyone was just like apoplectic, right, about television. It was like, oh my God, like, this is the end. This is the end. Kids are watching TV. And we're the generation that grew up on TV, and we read. And if there's one thing that, there's many things to take from McLuhan, but I think one thing that we really must take from McLuhan is that what he says is that basically every new media or every new form of media technology basically exerts a pressure on the preceding form of media or technology. The weak forms, and this is kind of where it gets a bit Darwinist, but the weak forms of media and technology will die. So the CD died without anyone bursting out into tears. The CD was a weak form, I think. The vinyl record, it's not disappeared. There are inimitable qualities to the vinyl record, as there are to the book. And basically the last thing I would say is that just because the paper book isn't power, we don't plug it in and charge it up at night, doesn't mean that it's not a piece of technology. It's a piece of technology that's remained unbelievably resilient. And if anything, I was basically talking to the art director of Penguin a few days ago, and he said that he believes that in London, he sees less Kindles now on the Underground, on the Tube, than he did 2 or 3 years ago. I think that's probably true. And so I think there's something, I think we have to, I think we have to be, for every one of these statements that we make, basically a counter-statement and a counter-factuality can be made as well. So.
No, I completely agree, and so I think mine is the sort of counter-statement to the statements that are being made, I feel. I don't feel like, and I think that shift may be happening too.
So we get the last question, please.
Sorry. Can I just add a coda to Shamma's, which is that the book itself was a piece of very profoundly disruptive technology, which was seen as destroying the art of memory. And coda.
I have a question in terms of, because, as a blogger, I guess I'm kind of antithesis to what you're saying, but I'm kind of curious in terms of if anyone has thoughts about sometimes the positive value of forgetting, and meaning like sometimes forgetting is also about the potential for change. Do you know? And often people who go through traumatic things often talk about forgetting. So I'm just wondering if any of you have thought about that.
The art of forgetting what?
Oh, I've thought about it a lot. Do you want me to?
But is there a particular... Generally. Go ahead.
I thought about it a lot because, and it's funny because I mentioned that Ishiguro book, the buried giant, and that's all about forgetting and remembering and the value of forgetting. For example, in the context of war, sworn enemies, sometimes forgetting might be a good thing. Forgetting the kind of trauma that people went through. When I mention my students who have forgotten about the invasion, I'm of two minds about that. In part, I'm glad, because you don't want them to have a sense of Iraq as an enemy. On the other hand, it means that they forget other kinds of things that are important, So I do think that there's a benefit. There are benefits to forgetting, of course, socially, personally, when you're dealing with things like trauma, as well. On the other hand, I think there's an incredible danger to forgetting as well. And I think my concern is that it may be happening too easily. Despite the incredible work that's being done when we've talked about all the last 2 days in terms of digital archiving, I worry about the seemingly easy forgetfulness that I witness just as a person around me. And that bothers me a little bit.
Okay.
I think that there's value in forgetting because it allows for multiple narratives about the same thing to reemerge, and I think that's how literary trends can come out of something. What we read about 20 years ago may reemerge again in this generation as a reinterpretation. So I think it allows for creativity in that people look at it with fresh eyes.
Okay, finally, there is important book for the German author. The name is Arndt Fischer. The book is being titled by The Necessity of the Art. And in the first beginning, he asked, did the art disappear in any time? And he answered, no. No way art, writing, cinema, theater, be disappear. And the very easy reason behind that human being cannot live without art because he is always in a worry. Always he is unbalanced, and he cannot be balanced with his environment only by art. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.